The maitre d' put his hand flat against my collarbone. Not a shove. Worse than a shove. A measured, practiced stop, the kind taught in training manuals for exactly this situation. A woman in a department store dress trying to walk into a room full of tailored silk. This event is invitation only, ma'am. Behind him, through the gap in the frosted glass doors, I could see the chandeliers, could hear the low murmur of 400 people who had each paid $11,000 a plate to be seen funding the future of clean manufacturing. I could see my sister Diane in the dress I'd helped her zip up 3 hours earlier, laughing at something our mother said, her hand resting on the arm of a man named Avery Cole, who happened to control $900 million in venture capital. I had an invitation. It was in my coat pocket, embossed, my name spelled correctly, Renata Voss. I didn't take it out. I know, I said. I'm not on the list anymore. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it later, that I knew. That somewhere around 4 that afternoon, my mother had called the venue and quietly had my name struck from the guest registry, and I'd found out only because the assistant coordinator, a kind woman named Priya, had texted me a screenshot out of what she called professional discomfort. I'd read it standing in my bathroom in a half-zipped dress, and I'd kept getting ready anyway. Some decisions you make in 4 seconds and spend years finding out whether they were brave or insane. I want to tell you who I was before that night, because the version of me standing at that door was already someone different from the girl who used to set the table for family dinners, and then eat standing up at the counter because there weren't enough chairs. There were always enough chairs, there just weren't enough chairs for me. I am the second daughter of Marguerite and Donald Voss, of Voss Industrial Coatings, a 110-year-old company that makes anti-corrosion treatments for pipelines, bridges, and offshore rigs. Unglamorous, essential, and apparently not worth mentioning to my own family once I stopped being convenient. My older brother Theo runs operations. My sister Diane runs communications, a job that mostly consists of being photogenic at events like this one. I ran the lab. For 11 years, I ran the lab nobody walked through on tours, the one with the humidity chambers and the salt spray cabinets and the patent filings stacked in gray binders. Nobody in my family had ever opened. I want to be precise about the years because precision is the only thing I trust anymore. I was 26 when I came back from my doctorate in materials science to help out for a year. I was 37 the night of the gala. In between those numbers sat 11 years of birthdays where my father raised a glass to Theo's instincts and Diane's vision, and never once, not once, mentioned the 17 patents filed under Voss Industrial that had my name on the inventor line. 11 years of Christmas dinners where I was asked, gently, indulgently, when I might find something more sociable to do with my chemistry degree. 11 years of watching my mother introduce my siblings to clients with whole sentences of pride, and introduce me, when she remembered to introduce me at all, as, "And this is Renata, she's very smart." Very smart. Like a dog that can do long division. The thing about being overlooked for 11 years is that it doesn't feel like one long humiliation. It feels like 1,000 small ones, spaced out just far enough that you can talk yourself out of being angry about any single one. A seating chart, a company newsletter that profiled the Voss siblings driving innovation and used a photo with only 2 siblings in it. A press release about a coding breakthrough that thanked our brilliant R&D partners without naming a single person who had actually run the 11 months of accelerated corrosion testing. Each one survivable. The sum of them, I would learn, was not. So when the maitre d' put his hand on my collarbone and told me politely that I wasn't on the list, I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing with my family's version of events years before. I simply said, "I understand," turned around, walked to the edge of the lobby where the cocktail tables were being broken down by catering staff, and waited. I want you to sit with that image for a second, because it matters for what comes later. A woman quietly waiting in a hotel lobby, uninvited from her own family's celebration, while inside, under crystal light, her parents accepted applause for an achievement that was, on paper, mine. I wasn't waiting out of pride. I was waiting because I'd learned, the hard way, that the truth has its own schedule, and mine had just arrived 3 weeks early in a manila envelope from a federal regulator's office. I'll get to that. First, you should understand exactly what was being celebrated in that ballroom, and exactly how far my family had gone to make sure I had no part in it. 18 months before that night, Voss Industrial Coatings had been a respectable, unremarkable, mid-sized manufacturer, the kind of company that shows up in trade journals twice a year and nowhere else. Then, everything changed. Because of a compound I'd developed almost by accident while trying to solve a much smaller problem. Extending coating life on subsea pipeline joints in high salinity environments. What I built instead, after 4 years of failed formulations, was a self-healing polymer coating that could seal microfractures in real time using ambient moisture as a catalyst. In plain terms, a coating that repairs itself before corrosion can take hold. In commercial terms, which I understood far better than my family ever gave me credit for. It was worth, conservatively, $800 million in licensing potential across pipeline, marine, and aerospace applications. I filed the first patent application myself, working with outside patent counsel. I paid for personally because the company's legal budget that quarter had been allocated to a trademark dispute over Diane's rebranded logo. I want that detail to land. The company spent more defending a font than it had ever spent protecting the single most valuable piece of intellectual property it would produce in a century of existence. I filed under my own name as sole inventor, assigned the rights to Voss Industrial as required by my employment contract, and kept, carefully, in a locked filing cabinet in my apartment, every working draft, every lab notebook, every email establishing the chain of invention from my hand and no one else's. I did that not out of paranoia. I did it because 11 years of being erased teaches you to keep receipts. The coding worked. It worked spectacularly. Within a year, 3 offshore operators had signed pilot licensing agreements. My father, who had spent a decade barely able to name what I did for a living, suddenly understood the term licensing revenue with remarkable fluency, especially in board meetings, especially when investors were in the room. Here is what I discovered slowly over those 18 months, piecing it together from things I overheard and things I was deliberately not told. My father had quietly restructured the IP holding entity. A new subsidiary, Voss Materials Innovation LLC, had been formed to hold the patent licenses going forward. Clean, efficient, tax-advantaged, unremarkable on its face. Except that the founding documents filed by the family's longtime corporate attorney listed 3 managing members, Donald Voss, Theo Voss, and Diane Voss. My name did not appear anywhere in the operating agreement, not as a member, not as an officer, not as a footnote. I found this because Priya, the same coordinator who would later text me about the gala, had, in an earlier and unrelated context, forwarded me a vendor list that included the LLC's EIN registration documents, attached by accident to an event sponsorship packet. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding corporate paperwork I'd never had reason to study before. I wasn't misunderstanding it. My invention had been placed inside a legal structure designed, whether by intention or convenient oversight, to ensure that if the company were ever sold or the IP licensed at scale, or the whole division spun off and taken public, every dollar would flow to 3 people, not 4. I didn't confront anyone immediately. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story where the wronged woman marches into her father's office and delivers a righteous speech is satisfying and almost never how real reckonings happen. Real reckonings happen in silence, while you build a case so complete that speeches become unnecessary. So I built one. Over the following months, while my family planned what would become the largest fundraising gala in company history, built explicitly around the Voss family's breakthrough materials science platform, language I read in 3 different draft press releases, I did 3 things, methodically, almost clinically. First, I consulted an intellectual property attorney outside the family's circle, a woman named Carolyn Achebe, who specialized in inventors' rights and corporate patent disputes. She reviewed every lab notebook, every dated email, every draft patent application I had filed under my own name. Her assessment, delivered in the flat, unemotional tone I'd come to crave from professionals after years of emotional manipulation from family, was simple. I had an airtight inventorship claim, and depending on the precise language of my original employment contract, which predated the restructuring by 9 years and contained no assignment language covering newly formed subsidiary entities. There was a real argument that the transfer of licensing rights to Voss Materials Innovation LLC, without my consent or compensation, constituted a breach of fiduciary duty to me as both inventor and minority shareholder in the parent company. Second, I quietly engaged a forensic accountant, a meticulous, soft-spoken man named Julian Reyes, to trace the actual cash flows. What he found took him 6 weeks and 140 pages. The 3 pilot licensing agreements I knew about had already generated $2 million in royalty payments. None of it had touched the parent company's general ledger. All of it had flowed directly into Voss Materials Innovation LLC's separate account, then out again as management distributions to its 3 members. My father had used part of that money, 11% of total distributions to date, Julian's report noted with exacting precision, to fund the gala currently being planned to celebrate our family's innovation legacy. Third, and this is the part I want you to understand was never about revenge, I filed a formal inventor's rights disclosure with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's Assignment Records Office, correcting and supplementing the chain of title on the original patent application. It was a quiet, procedural, entirely legal act. It also meant that, as of 3 weeks before the gala, there existed a federal record, searchable, public, citable, establishing me as the uncontested sole inventor of the technology my family was about to use to court $900 million in new investment. Investment they intended to fold into Voss Materials Innovation LLC, the entity that still excluded me. I told no one in my family any of this. I let them plan their gala. I let my mother strike my name from the guest list because by then I understood, with the cold clarity Carolyn had taught me to value, that being excluded was not an injury anymore. It was evidence. I stood in that lobby for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand on my watch, an old habit from running timed corrosion trials, where 11 minutes can be the difference between a passing and failing sample. At minute 11, a man in his 60s, silver-haired, unhurried, stepped out of the ballroom doors with a flute of champagne he hadn't touched and looked directly at me. "Dr. Voss," he said. I didn't recognize him immediately, though I should have. Avery Cole, managing partner of Halcyon Strategic Capital, the firm whose $900 million commitment was the entire reason this gala existed. The man I'd last seen laughing with my sister's hand on his arm. "You're not on the registry," he said, not as an accusation, but as a fact he found professionally interesting. I asked, twice. "I know," I said. "I read your patent filing 3 weeks ago," he said. "The PTO correction. My technical diligence team flags inventorship changes on any IP we're underwriting above $50 million in exposure. Standard practice." He took a slow breath, the kind people take before saying something they've already decided to say, regardless of consequence. "I have some questions for the room tonight that I don't think your family is prepared to answer. I think you should be in there when I ask them." I said the only honest thing I had left. They removed me from the list. "I'm aware," Avery Cole said. "I'm also the reason this event has 400 people in it, instead of 40. I think that buys me the authority to add one back." He held out his arm, the same courteous gesture my sister had received hours earlier from him in a different context entirely, and said, "Walk in with me." I want to describe the room exactly as I saw it, because I've replayed it so many times since that the details have taken on the sharpened clarity of a forensic photograph. Round tables, white linen, centerpieces of white orchids my mother had spent 4 months selecting, a stage at the front with a screen displaying the Voss Industrial logo beside a new tagline, "Materials that heal themselves." A podium. My father at it mid-speech, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had given the same toast at a dozen industry dinners. He saw me first. I watched the warmth in his face do something complicated. Flicker, recalibrate, attempt to absorb the sight of his band daughter walking in on the arm of his single most important investor. "And so," my father continued, recovering with the smoothness of decades of practice, "it's the Voss family's vision, generation after generation. That's brought us to this moment. Donald," Avery Cole said, not loudly, but with the particular carrying quality of a voice trained to be heard in boardrooms. Before you finish that thought, I'd like to ask a question, if the room will indulge me. It's the reason Halcyon is here tonight. 400 conversations stopped at slightly different speeds, the way a wave breaks unevenly along a shoreline. Of course, Avery, my father said. His smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. 3 weeks ago, Avery said, walking unhurried toward the stage, still holding my arm, my diligence team flagged a correction to the inventorship record on U.S. Patent 11-847-203, the self-healing polymer coding this entire presentation, and frankly, this entire fundraise is built around. The correction names a sole inventor, Dr. Renata Voss. He paused. I'd like to understand why the woman standing next to me, the inventor of record on the patent we're being asked to fund $900 million against, was removed from tonight's guest list by her own family. I have never, before or since, heard a ballroom go that silent. Not polite silence. The silence of 400 people simultaneously recalculating who held power in a room they'd thought they understood an hour earlier. My mother stood from her table near the front, her face arranging itself into the brittle, gracious smile she reserved for moments she needed to control. Avery, there's clearly been some confusion about seating. It's not about seating, Marguerite, Avery said, and I noted distantly that he used her first name with the easy familiarity of someone who had hosted her at his own dinner table more than once. It's about ownership. I'd like Dr. Voss to walk us through the actual structure of who holds the rights to the technology you're asking us to fund, because the documents my legal team pulled from the LLC filing don't match the story on that screen behind you. I didn't ask permission. I'd spent 11 years asking permission to exist in rooms my own work had built. I walked to the podium. My father stepped aside not because he wanted to, but because 400 witnesses and his single largest investor left him no graceful alternative. I didn't raise my voice. Carolyn had taught me that volume reads as emotion, and emotion is what people use to dismiss women in rooms like that one. I spoke the way I'd been trained to present findings to skeptical review boards, clearly with documentation, without adjectives. My name is Dr. Renata Voss, I said. I hold a doctorate in materials science. I have worked at Voss Industrial Coatings for 11 years, the last 4 of them developing the self-healing coating technology being presented tonight. I am the sole named inventor on U.S. Patent 11-847-203, as corrected in the federal record 3 weeks ago. I held up a single page, not theatrically, just functionally, the way you'd hold up a reference document in a lab meeting. This is the PTO assignment record. It's public. Anyone in this room can search it tonight. I let that settle for exactly as long as it needed to, then continued. What's being presented to you as the Voss family's innovation platform is, legally, an entity called Voss Materials Innovation LLC. I am not a member of that entity. I do not hold equity in it. I have never received a single dollar of the $4.2 million in royalty payments that entity has already collected from licensing my invention. I held up a second document. This is a forensic accounting summary prepared independently, tracing those distributions. 11% of them funded this event. My father's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. Diane, 3 tables back, had stopped breathing in a way I could see from the stage. Theo was staring at his phone, already, I would learn later, trying to reach the family's attorney. I'm not here to ask Halcyon Strategic Capital not to invest, I said. Voss Industrial makes a genuinely excellent product, and I believe in the science behind it because I built the science behind it. I'm here because any investment of this size deserves accurate diligence, and the diligence currently on offer is incomplete in a way that should concern every person in this room who's about to write a check. I paused. I'd encourage Mr. Cole's legal team to request the original LLC operating agreement, dated 14 months ago, and compare its membership list to tonight's program, which credits the Voss family collectively for an invention 3 of its members had no hand in creating. Avery Cole, still standing at the base of the stage, nodded once, the nod of a man whose instincts had just been thoroughly confirmed. That's all I needed to hear tonight, he said. Donald, Marguerite, my office will be in touch tomorrow. I think we'll need a restructured agreement before this round closes. one that reflects who actually built what we're buying. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Men like Avery Cole have learned that the documents do the gloating for you. I want to tell you what happened in the 90 seconds after I stepped down from that podium, because it's the part people always ask about, and it's also the part that disappointed me most in the end, in its smallness. My mother did not come to me. She went to Avery Cole, already rebuilding, already calculating how to salvage the largest fundraise in company history. Her voice pitched low and urgent in a way I'd heard her use before with creditors and, once, memorably, with a journalist asking uncomfortable questions about a workplace safety citation. My father found me near the edge of the stage, his hand briefly on my elbow, his voice dropped to the register he used for things he didn't want recorded. "We can fix this internally," he said. "There's no need to have aired it in front of—" He gestured vaguely at 400 people in evening wear. "Everyone." "You aired it first," I said. "I just brought the documentation." Diane found me near the bar, her face flushed with the particular fury of someone whose evening had been ruined by facts she hadn't been told existed. "Do you have any idea what you just did to this family's reputation?" "I have a very precise idea," I said. "I have it in a 140-page forensic report if you'd like a copy." She didn't answer that. She turned and walked back toward our mother, and that, I think, was the moment I understood the gala was over for me. Not the official end, which came an hour later when the band stopped and the valets brought cars around, but the real end, the end of believing there was a version of my family that would, given the right evidence at the right moment, finally see me clearly and feel something like shame or pride or even simple recognition. There wasn't a scene. There wasn't a slap or a shouted accusation or the kind of cinematic unraveling people sometimes picture when they imagine confronting a family that's wronged them. There was just a slow, visible recalibration around the room. 400 people quietly deciding, table by table, what they now believed about the Voss family's vision. And a smaller, more important recalibration inside me, deciding what I now believed about the cost of staying quiet. The weeks afterward were not dramatic. They were procedural, which is its own kind of brutal. Halcyon's legal team did exactly what Avery said they would. They requested the full LLC operating agreement, the original employment contract, every patent filing, every royalty distribution record. Carolyn represented my interest in the negotiations that followed. Negotiations my family had no real leverage to avoid, since walking away from Halcyon's commitment would have meant walking away from the only capital that could scale the technology beyond pilot licensing. The resolution was not a dramatic windfall, and I want to be honest about that too, because the people who profit from these stories online always want the ending to be a number with a lot of zeros. It was something quieter and, to me, more valuable. A corrected operating agreement naming me as a 40% member of Voss Materials Innovation LLC, retroactive royalty compensation, calculated by Julian's forensic accounting to the dollar, and a binding consulting agreement establishing me as the sole technical authority over any future licensing of my own patents. With contractual veto power my family could not override. I did not return to running the lab at Voss Industrial. I want to be clear that this was not punishment and not exile. It was a boundary drawn by me with full legal force behind it for the first time in 11 years. I now run an independent materials consultancy. Voss Industrial is, ironically, one of my clients, a contractual, professional relationship governed by invoices and deliverables instead of birthday toasts and seating charts. I attend exactly the meetings required by the consulting agreement. I do not attend family dinners. I have not been to a Voss family holiday gathering in the 14 months since the gala, and I have stopped waiting for an invitation that means anything. My father called twice in the first month, each time opening with some variation of, "We should talk about how to move forward as a family." I let both calls go to voicemail and responded by email, the medium Carolyn recommended for anything that might later need to be referenced precisely. My mother has not called at all. I understand that silence. She has never been a woman who apologizes. She manages narratives, and the narrative of our brilliant, overlooked daughter does not currently serve any purpose she recognizes. Diane sent one message 4 months later that read, "I hope you're happy with what you did to us." I did not respond. Some messages are not questions. They are attempts to make you carry weight that was never yours. People ask me when they hear this story whether I regret walking into that ballroom on Avery Cole's arm instead of simply going home. I don't. But I also don't romanticize it the way I think the story wants to be romanticized, as some glittering moment of triumphant vindication. What I remember most clearly isn't the silence in the room, or my father's face going pale, or even the satisfaction, and there was satisfaction, I won't pretend otherwise, of watching documentation do, in 90 seconds, what 11 years of hoping to be seen had never managed. What I remember most is standing afterward, alone, near a service hallway just off the ballroom, while a banquet team folded tablecloths around me, and feeling not triumph but a kind of exhausted clarity, the way you feel after a long, decisive test concludes, and the sample either holds or it doesn't. And now you simply know. I had spent 11 years hoping my family would recognize my value voluntarily, as a gift, an act of love. They never did, and I've come to believe they never would have, no matter how many patents I filed or breakthroughs I delivered, because recognizing me would have meant admitting what they'd taken. Value, I learned that night, is not something you can wait to be granted. It is something you document, protect, and, when necessary, present in a room full of witnesses who have no emotional stake in denying it. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I say it the way I'd report a finding from a long trial. This is simply what the data showed. If there's a single thing I'd want anyone listening to take from this, it isn't expose your family publicly, because that was never the point and rarely the right tool. It's this: keep your own records. Whatever you build, a formula, a business, a body of work, a quiet kind of competence nobody claps for. Document it as if one day you'll need to prove to a room of strangers that it was yours. Because the people closest to you are not always the ones who will protect your name. Sometimes the only protection available is the paper trail you were wise enough or wounded enough to keep all along. I didn't get my family back that night. I got something I now understand was more durable. I got the truth on the record in my own name, where no one could quietly remove it again.